All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I am giving you my reaction to the 4 players the Atlanta Falcons selected on day 2 of the 2022 NFL Draft, including whether or not third-round quarterback Desmond Ridder is the Falcons' QB1 of the future.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on Falc Fans on Twitter, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here as part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And of course, you can find Locked On Falcons, just like all Locked On Sports Atlanta podcasts, including Locked On Hawks and Locked On Bulldogs, free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, as well as YouTube. And you get the YouTube video version of the podcast the day before the audio drops. And of course, it's not Monday and Friday, as most of you guys are watching or listening to this. It's Saturday or Sunday. And today we're talking about the Falcons' Friday night picks on day 2 of the draft. And I'll be upfront with you guys. I didn't really see much of Troy Andersen and DeAngelo Malone, and I'll watch those guys later on. So we'll start things off. We'll touch on those guys a little bit later in the episode, but we'll start things off talking about, to me, the big pick, right? You know, it wasn't the first pick of day 2. But it was the most significant pick of day 2, and that's Desmond Ridder, the quarterback out of Cincinnati, in their 73rd overall in round 3. And basically, if you're new to this, you've been living under a rock. We've been talking about Desmond Ridder on this podcast for 3 or 4 months. But the blurb on him was a 4-year starter at Cincinnati, threw for over 10,000 yards across his career, was 2-time AAC Offensive Player of the Year, obviously led Cincinnati to a playoff berth this past year. They got beat by Alabama, and I know a lot of people watched that game and said, oh, he wasn't that impressive to me. Again, Falcon fans need to learn the lessons of A.J. Terrell and whatnot, not being too judgmental about a playoff game to define what you think about a player. But I would say if you really watch that game, you'll see that, he had no chance because Cincinnati's offensive line got absolutely wrecked by Alabama's front in that game. And so if you were one of those people that had been like, oh, Matt Ryan never stood a chance this past year behind the Falcons offensive line, I think you take that and dial it up a little bit, and that's kind of how Cincinnati's offensive line was in that game. So I don't think it would be too fair to negatively judge Ridder off of that one game if you're so inclined to do so. So, I think this pick is a good pick. I think it's great value in round 3. It's kind of a situation where if it does work out, the potential is there that we could be looking at this pick several years down the road as one of the bigger potential steals of this draft class if Desmond Ridder lives up to the expectations that some people have for him. But I think the genius of this pick, if you're going to go there, is that you get him at a late enough time in the draft that you're not married to him, right? You're drafting him. Typically a 3rd-round quarterback is going to be a backup, but he'll have a chance in Atlanta to potentially be the starter. But if he doesn't necessarily flash enough in year 1 and the Falcons are picking high in next year's draft, they won't be married to Desmond Ridder, and they can take a quarterback then and not feel like, oh, we wasted a premium pick like they would have felt like if they had taken Desmond Ridder in round 1. And we've talked about Ridder as potentially the best scheme fit in this, Arthur Smith-led offense. You've heard comparisons. Some people compare him to Marcus Mariota. Some people compare him to Ryan Tannehill. I've even heard Dak Prescott comparisons, and that's what I mean where we're talking about a potential steal if he starts living up to that. That latter comparison seems to come from folks that really like him. We talked about this before when we were talking about Malik Willis and his ceiling and sort of the idea that if, some of the people that like Desmond Ridder and had him as QB1 in this draft class, and there's a lot of smart folks that, do watch the film and came away thinking that, a lot of those people seem to think that Desmond Ridder has that Dak Prescott type of upside and ceiling. And if you think that is the case, then, the idea that Malik Willis had by far the best ceiling in this draft class may not necessarily hold as much water with those folks that had that. Now, I wasn't there when I watched Desmond Ridder back in February. I didn't quite see that. Now, granted, I didn't watch the all 22 of Desmond Ridder. I was just watching television copy on YouTube and whatnot and of his play. So that may have skewed my perception differently because I'm not necessarily seeing the nuance of how he's reading defenses and whatnot. But the comparisons I had for him were Daniel Jones and Alex Smith, which are not glowing comparisons by any means. The reason why I kind of compared him to Daniel Jones is like similar to Daniel Jones, who can scoot, but like you don't look at you don't go into a game thinking, oh man, we got to stop and contain Daniel Jones's running ability. He's a major weapon. I think that's kind of how Ridder's athleticism applies. And then Daniel Jones tends to be a little scattershot and he'll leave some throws on the field. And that's one of the bigger knocks on Ridder. Alex Smith, the comparison for me came, there were just too many instances watching the film where it was like 3rd and 9 and he would settle for like a 6-yard throw. And that's something that Alex Smith was kind of infamous for being. So, hopefully I'll get a chance to watch more all 22 of Desmond Ridder, particularly later on when we get to the scouting report, later in May and hopefully in May. Hopefully we're not doing that in June. But then I'll be able to see maybe his ability to read defenses, and that will pop a little bit more on film. But, all signs seem to indicate he has the mental makeup to be a starter in the NFL. A lot of people think that, from the neck up, he's one of the better quarterbacks in this draft class and seems to have that sort of professional mentality. And, if Arthur Blank is saying we're looking for a new Matt Ryan in terms of like the mental makeup of a guy that could be a leader in the locker room, I think there's reasons. I'm not saying that he's Matt Ryan, but I'm just sitting there saying there's reasons to think that maybe Desmond Ridder is wired more that way than some of the other guys potentially in this draft class. And I think, the fact that he fell to round 3, may put a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. So that certainly is not going to hurt the Falcons by all means. Maybe it hurts the other 31 teams in the league, but we'll see how that plays out. So, I think there is going to be somewhat of a competition between him and Marcus Mariota. It's probably going to be a nominal competition because, everybody competes for jobs, but like, it's going to be Mariota's job to lose. But I think, if Mariota's bad this summer and Ridder is especially good early on, I think, the leash is going to be shorter on Mariota. It's kind of similar, again, it's not the same exact dynamic, but it's similar to kind of the Chris Redman, Matt Ryan thing that we saw in 08. So, Ryan just kind of came in here and just like ran roughshod over Chris Redman, and Redman really never had a chance. I think Mariota is going to have more than a chance and probably, I think is a relatively safe bet that he will be the week 1 starter, but I don't think he's necessarily guaranteed to be the week 18 starter. And I've been, stressing this throughout the offseason, that when you now with a guy like Ridder, you have a young quarterback on your roster that you want to kind of see and get an evaluation of him. And typically in the NFL, if you're a non-playoff team, the minute you're out of playoff contention, it's time to start showing the young guys. And I think that's a realistic possibility with Ridder on the roster. If the Falcons were to say start the year 2-6 or something like that, there's really no incentive for the Falcons to continue to throw Marcus Mariota out there and not sort of see what Desmond Ridder has to see, if, so that they can evaluate their quarterback situation, because if they're going to be potentially picking high, they want to know what they have on the roster beyond, 7 preseason snaps that Desmond Ridder might get this summer. That may not, I don't know if that's going to be enough to get a full evaluation of Desmond Ridder. And, 7 would be very generous based off of last summer. So we'll see, combined, maybe Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder might get 7 snaps this preseason. I joke. Or am I? But but like, we'll sort of see how it plays out with Desmond Ridder. But definitely the team is going to want to be able to make an informed decision on that. And so that's why I do think there's a good chance sitting here today, whether Desmond Ridder, wins the competition in camp, but I think there's a good chance that we'll be seeing Desmond Ridder start games for the Atlanta Falcons this fall and this winter. So we'll have a lot more to unpack about Desmond Ridder in the coming weeks and months. But I do like the pick. I think it's great value. I think it gives yourself a plan B in the event that you don't suck, in that crazy reality that we might find ourselves living in, where the Falcons don't suck completely and don't suck enough to guarantee their ability to find a high-level quarterback at the top of next year's draft. So, putting all your eggs in that basket of like, we're just going to tank for Tua, tank for CJ Stroud, tank for Bryce Young, tank for whoever, to me, it was never a viable strategy. And I think this is a great pick to give yourself a plan B that you don't necessarily have to be stuck with. You don't have the answer quite yet at quarterback, but you have an answer at quarterback. And I think that's a really good way of putting it for the Falcons. So we'll move on from Desmond Ridder and circle back to the player that the Falcons took at the top of round 2, and Penn State pass rusher Arnold Ebiketie, the doctor. We'll talk about that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast, guys. But you could have seen my live reaction to the Desmond Ridder pick on the Locked On NFL live show that's been going pick by pick, Thursday night, Friday night, and we'll continue it on Saturday. So make sure you check out the Locked On NFL live draft show, giving you the insightful analysis from all the various Locked On experts on Saturday. And of course, you can find that on your preferred streaming platform, but go by all means, check it out on YouTube on the Locked On NFL YouTube channel. And guys, I want to tell you about Shady Rays, the independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of expensive $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. And you're getting features like polarized lenses, doubled durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. And something that you're going to get at Shady Rays that you'll get nowhere else is their insane protection program, which includes lost and broken protection for every pair. They'll send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. So give it a try. And if you don't love your Shady Rays sunglasses, you'll pay nothing. It's that simple. And in addition to looking good, you can help a good cause, because with every order at Shady Rays, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America. So head to ShadyRays.com and use the promo code Locked On to get 50% off 2 or more pair of polarized sunglasses. That's code Locked On, LOCKEDON, for the best deal of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses. So let's talk about Penn State pass rusher Arnold Ebiketie, who the Falcons traded up in round 2 to get. They went from 43 to 38, gave up their 4th round pick. And I know a lot of people at the time thought, oh, they're going to get one of the quarterbacks. And no, they did not. They got their pass rusher. Ebiketie spent several years at Temple before transferring to Penn State this past year, and a breakout year with 9.5 sacks. He's nicknamed himself the doctor because he's the doctor of pass rush. And I'm sure Chuck Smith might sue him for some trademark infringement there, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see how that gets settled in court. But I did watch 2.5 games of Arnold Ebiketie this morning because I had a feeling, okay, like maybe the Falcons might get this guy. And I hadn't really watched him since early in the offseason when I was just kind of running through all the edge rushers just to get a general idea of them. And, I came away liking him, but he didn't really like wow me in those 2.5 games. I saw a guy that has a good first step and speed to attack the corner. I saw aspects of hand usage and aspects of power, but I didn't see it consistently enough that, I felt like those were strengths of his game. It just seemed like his game was reliant on speed and that first step quickness. So, I'll give more thoughts on him as I watch more film. And I certainly think he's an upgrade over what the Falcons currently have, because the Falcons currently have nothing in terms of pass rush, pretty much. But, so I would sit here and say he's probably steps onto the roster day one and is probably their best pass rusher, which, is probably not saying a whole lot. So we'll see, where I ultimately land on him with further study. But I saw probably a few too many reps where he seemed to get a little pushed around. So I kind of wonder if, at least early in his career, he may be destined to be more of a situational player and come in on passing downs and may not necessarily be a full-time guy on early downs. But I think it's a big step in the right direction. I think you got really good value for a player that a lot of people thought would be potentially a late first round pick throughout the offseason. Now, when the 2.5 games I watched, first round ability didn't necessarily jump out to me. He looked more like a second round guy, but again, that's not a bad thing. It's just typically when I'm looking at what a first round edge feels like, to me is more of a guy that I feel good about saying like that guy can be a number 1 or number 2 pass rusher in the NFL. That's a guy that I feel like, is going to give you 6 to 8 sacks at a minimum and 40 or 50 pressures at a minimum. That's a number 2 guy to me. And a number 1 is obviously like a double-digit sack guy that's giving you like 75 pressures or something like that. But my initial impression of Ebiketie was kind of like maybe he's more of a number 3 type of guy. But again, 2.5 games I'm not going to come too hard on that. But like right now, he's somewhere between like a number 3 and a number 2, right? And the more I watch, the more he'll sort of fall in that sort of spectrum for me. So that is an opinion that is subject to change is basically the point I'm trying to make. He tested very well, be the last point I'll say. And so, we know that athleticism is a big part of rushing the quarterback because there's very few productive pass rushers in the NFL that aren't athletic because, a lot of your game, and we talked about this before, a lot of your game relies on, winning with that first step, and you need to be athletic to be able to beat often bigger offensive tackles around the edge and whatnot. So he checks that box as far as we can go. But as I often say, particularly when it comes to the Falcons pass rush, beggars cannot be choosers. And right now, the Falcons are so devoid of talent right now that we got to take what we can get. So hopefully, the more I watch of Ebiketie, I'll be able to come away and say, oh, he's definitely a number 2 guy. And so we'll just sort of see how that plays out. And we'll see how the rest of today's episode plays out, talking about Troy Andersen and DeAngelo Malone, the other 2 players that I did not get really much of an opportunity to watch before recording this episode, but I'll give you what information I know about those guys as we wrap up today's day 2 draft recap for this Falcons 2022 draft class. And guys, speaking of recaps, why not check out the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast? The 3 shows, A to Z with Mark Zinno, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, and ATL Day Ones with Tanitra Batiste and Jarvis Davis to get their thoughts on the Falcons draft haul, as well as all the things going on with the Hawks, the Braves, and all of Atlanta and Georgia local sports. And of course, you can find Locked On Sports Atlanta on its own podcast feed on your preferred podcast platform, as well as on its own YouTube channel. So, guys, I want to tell you about Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, even better than a candy bar, because Built Bars not only taste good, they're good for you. They're low in sugar, low in calories, low in carbs, but high in protein and high in fiber. And those are things that you want to get. You want to cut your calories while increasing your protein just in time for the summer so you can get that banging beach body, to impress all the ladies or the guys or, whatever you're into on those beaches. And of course, Built Bar has unveiled their new granola flavors. You can get the chocolate peanut butter and chocolate coconut flavors while supplies last. And whether you're buying the granola or any other product on the Built Bar website, you'll get a free Built Boost, the immune supporting product that they have with any purchase over at built.com. So head on over to built.com, buy a mixed box of granola, buy a mixed box of the other Built Bars, or buy whatever you want. And when you do, make sure you use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So let's talk about Troy Andersen. First, he was the second of the Falcons' 2 second-round picks, taken at pick 58. And he has a very interesting background. He was a 0-star recruit out of high school, where he did play quarterback his last 2 years in high school. Then as a freshman at Montana State, he played running back. Then they moved him to quarterback. and he was very productive in both of those roles. And then they moved him to linebacker, and that's where he kind of stayed his last 2 years, although I think he did dabble a little bit on offense from time to time as a running back at times. He's a big linebacker, 6'4", 243 pounds, tested out the gym at the combine, 98th percentile 40-yard dash, 94th percentile broad jump. His 3-cone at his pro day was 95th percentile for a linebacker. Short shuttle was 94th percentile. So speed, explosiveness, agility, he checked all those boxes from a testing standpoint. But as I said earlier, I haven't really sat down and watched him other than maybe a highlight reel of his. And I'll certainly sit down and watch him on Saturday, and probably will tweet out those thoughts throughout the day as we're sort of just twiddling our thumbs, on day 3 of the draft while you guys are watching the Locked On NFL Draft live show on Saturday on YouTube and whatnot. But the buzz on Andersen seems to be that his athleticism pops on film, and again on the highlight reels that they showed the plays that his athleticism in the side to sideline range showed out on those highlights. But the knocks on him seem to be maybe he's lacking a little bit of the instincts due to being relatively new at the linebacker position. Maybe he's not as great taking on blocks at the point of attack. Those are some of the knocks I've read and heard about Andersen. So we'll see if that's the case when I sit down and watch a couple of those Montana State games that I can get my hands on Saturday. Now, moving on to DeAngelo Malone, who was the Falcons' 3rd round pick at pick 82. This was the pick that the Falcons did get for Matt Ryan. Of course, 58 for the Troy Andersen pick was the pick that they got for Julio Jones. Now, DeAngelo Malone is local product, went to Martin Luther King High School in the Atlanta area, then Cedar Grove High School as well. For his senior year, then went to Western Kentucky, was very productive early on. I think he led the team in sacks 4 years there. He played 5 years, getting an extra year of eligibility due to COVID. So he was able to rack up some numbers in 62 career games and 53 career starts. He had 34 sacks, 60 tackles for loss, and 9 forced fumbles. So, very productive player, playing at Western Kentucky. He's not necessarily the biggest edge rusher, listed at about 6'3", 240. He did test very well at his pro day, ranging somewhere in like 65th, 70th, 75th percentile in most of those testing errors in the speed, agility, and explosiveness stuff. So again, he's a guy that I barely watch. I think I've seen maybe earlier in the process, saw him maybe half a game in passing, but I don't recall what I saw. So don't really have a take. Again, just like Andersen, I'll be sitting down Saturday to try to catch up on him. But it sounds like the buzz and the skinny on him is that he's mostly a speed rusher that doesn't necessarily have the mass or size to really hold up in the run game. May be sort of destined to be their sort of long-term Sam linebacker that can sort of sit and learn behind Lorenzo Carter this year, while Ebiketie might be more of that jack linebacker, that more of the pure rusher opposite him, where Ade Ogundeji is currently atop the depth chart. So we'll see how that plays out in terms of the depth chart later this summer. So from what I've read, Malone was not necessarily spending that much time on special teams in college because his immediate success at Western Kentucky. So he doesn't have a lot of reps there. So you do wonder if he is wind up being a backup, and at his size, that's typically a guy that's going to be asked to play on punt coverage and kickoff coverage, and whether or not he has the skill set to translate. Again, without having watched him, I don't know. Certainly he has the speed, running like a 4.54 at his pro day or whatever the case may be. That's certainly fast enough that you think he can, run down kicks and run down punts and whatnot. So we'll just sort of have to see. But overall, it was nice to see the Falcons focus on their defense on day 2 of the draft after, much ado. I won't say as much ado about nothing, but we made much ado about neglecting that position on day 1 with the selection of Drake London. You didn't necessarily see the team get a lot of beef on the defense, but you certainly saw the team upgrading their athleticism with guys like Ebiketie and Malone and Andersen all really checking those athletic boxes. Ridder certainly checks it at the quarterback position, although that's not necessarily something that you're too focused on at that particular position. So we'll see if the Falcons add a little bit more beef on their D-line on day 3 of the draft. I would guess with 3 picks remaining, they have a 5th round pick. They have 2 6th round picks. My guess is, and we'll see how the Falcons, stack their board. But my guess would be, at least just based off of need, D-line, running back, and punter would probably be the 3 spots that I would guess that they will address with those picks. But a lot of that will depend on their board, because that was one of the things that Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith insisted in their post day 2 presser, that they were very loyal to their draft board. And that's why, they were able to get, Desmond Ridder at 74, because, presumably, he wasn't that high on their board. And one of the things I thought was interesting about their board, and I noticed this last year with a couple of their picks, was how closely their board kind of resembles Dane Brugler of the Athletics, board that he has, his final board that he puts out. I can't remember exactly which picks it was, but I want to say like Richie Grant and maybe Jalen Mayfield and Drew Dahlman maybe were like the highest, like either 1 or 2 on Dane Brugler's board at the time when the Falcons were on the clock. And like what's notable is these 4 guys that the Falcons picked, today are very close to where Dane Brugler kind of ranked them, right? Like, they got Ebiketie at 38, but he was 28 on Dane Brugler's board. So you imagine that justifies the Falcons trading up from 43, because they're like, oh, he's not going to last this long. Then at pick 58, they got number 64 on Dane Brugler's board in Troy Andersen. Then at 74, they got number 40 on Brugler's board at Desmond Ridder. That doesn't necessarily match up the pattern, but certainly at that point in time, he was probably one of the best players available after maybe like Malik Willis and maybe 1 or 2 other, Nakobe Dean, I think, as far as guys left at that point in the draft. And then, the number 82 guy on the board was the number 82 pick, and that was DeAngelo Malone. So it's just interesting that, it seems like how the Falcons feel about players is comparable to how Dane Brugler feels about some of these players. So that'll be something to keep an eye on day 3 as that unfolds moving forward. So that's going to do it for us, guys. The other notable thing about these 4 selections is all 4 of these guys were Senior Bowl guys. Now we talked yesterday about, Drake London being young and being under the age of 21, and how him and Jalen Mayfield and Kyle Pitts were all under the age of 21 when they were drafted. Well, that didn't follow suit today, because DeAngelo Malone turns 23 in July, Ridder turns 23 at the end of August, and Andersen and Ebiketie are already 23. So that through line that the Falcons prefer young guys, seems more like a coincidence than necessarily something that is pervasive throughout all their picks, because I think Richie Grant was on the older side as well last year. So throw that out the window. Maybe it'll be a deciding factor for future number 1s or something like that. But other than that, no reason to put too much stock into it. So that's it, guys. Don't have any other reactions to these day 3 picks or day 2 picks, other than, talking about whether or not did the Falcons get the sort of collective haul, getting 4 or 5 long-term starters. And, without having seen Andersen and Malone yet, I can't say definitively that, but I do feel very confident that London will be a solid starter for the Falcons. I think Ridder has a chance to be a solid starter for the Falcons, and I think Ebiketie can be a solid starter for the Falcons. So that's 3 potential guys, and assuming if one of Andersen and Malone sort of also check that box, that's a pretty solid haul. That's 4 potential solid starters for the Falcons, with 8 going into the draft with 8 picks, and maybe coming out of it with 8 picks, I guess, right? I can't do math in my head. But yeah, so like that's a pretty solid haul, right? I'm not going to sit here and say like that's an incredible draft or anything like that. I'm not going to, until we get more information or whatever the case may be. But like I remember coming out of last year's draft feeling like it was kind of like a C+ draft, and mostly because of Kyle Pitts. And without Kyle Pitts in that draft, it would have been much, much lower grade on that draft. And right now, looking at this collective haul so far, and again, we'll see if it does feel like, again, right now, that we might actually get like something in the B range from me, at least. I'm sure others will feel a lot more positive about this draft, but whether it's a B, B minus, B plus, whatever the case may be, don't know yet until sit down and watch more of these guys and see what the Falcons get on day 3 of the draft. But it does feel like a better group of player. Like, I don't hate any of these picks, right? Like I did last year. Like, I hated the Jalen Mayfield. I was like, ugh, I didn't like that pick from the jump. I was like, oh, this is a bad pick. And then their 4th round hauls, it's like, okay, like that's fine, but like, so like, maybe I watch Andersen, maybe I watch Malone, I'm like, oh, I don't like this player, but so far I don't expect that to be the case. So I probably won't come out of this draft hating a pick by any means. I know you guys think I hate the London pick. I don't hate the London pick. I hate the fact that the Falcons, didn't get a premium player at a. We won't get into it. Let it go. I'm letting it go. Letting it go. It's over. Doesn't matter. Like the player, fine. So that's going to do it for us, guys. If you wanted to provide your feedback, of course, you can do so via Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. And of course, you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And I always want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. And in addition to all the various local shows, Locked On Braves, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Sports Atlanta, to be your second listen, why not check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, where Eric Crocker and Ryan Tracy are giving you the lowdown on their thoughts on this year's draft, and they'll have plenty of content in the coming days and weeks recapping this draft. So make sure you subscribe to the Locked On NFL Draft to get all the lowdown from an outside perspective on who drafted well, who drafted poorly, all that various stuff on Locked On NFL Draft, free and available on all the same podcast platforms you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. All right, guys, we'll be back tomorrow with the day 3 recap and probably a little bit more insight into guys like Troy Andersen and DeAngelo Malone. Appreciate it. DeAngelo Malone. Appreciate it. Till then.